And then we started a series a handful of weeks ago. We're going to wrap up today called Ready or Not. And this one is really all about kind of realizing in the midst of our kind of chasing the next thing or maybe living in regret from the last thing, we're trying to realize that God is doing something right here, right now. He wants to work with us in our lives, kind of whether we're ready for it or not. And the reality is that he has put some offers on the table. He has said, in essence, I want to change you, move you, meet you in the middle of wherever you are. And then we want to look and say, am I ready to receive that offer? Do I want to be changed and transformed and moved from darkness to light or from dead to alive? And we've been talking about that over the last handful of weeks. And if you've missed any of those conversations, really encourage you, maybe catch up online if you want. You can go to our YouTube channel or whatever and watch those. And I think it'll be really helpful to kind of gain the whole conversation. Last week, what we did is we spent a little bit of time talking about the reality of the need sometimes, oftentimes probably, to remove certain things from our lives. Right? That there's a reality that our sin against God can be very damaging to us and to others. And there are times when we just have to look and say, do I need a scalpel or do I need a machete? That was last week's conversation. If you missed that one, you're like, ooh, what? That's interesting, right? So you can catch that if you want to. What I want to do today, though, is I want to fill in kind of the rest of the conversation. Because at least this is what I found in my life. When I remove something from my life, usually what happens is if I don't replace it with something else, then the thing that I remove kind of pops back up, right? And so I have to get my head around if I'm going to take something away from my life, what do I do to kind of refill it? What do I replace it with? And that's kind of the essence of where we want to go. We want to talk about how we aim forward in following Jesus. Here's what kind of said to kick us off here with our notes. Said this: when you remove something from your life, it will come back if it's not replaced with something else. What is it, something else? And here's what I have found, at least this has been a little bit of my experience with following Jesus, is it took me a while to kind of hear the message in a fresh way. In some ways, when we present Jesus and what it means to follow him, it can sound a little bit like this. Stop, say a prayer, say yes to Jesus, stop doing a bunch of stuff, and then go to church a lot. And sometimes that sounds like the whole thing, right? You're like, oh, is that all that there is? Should I just replace whatever I cut out with maybe some more church, right? Some more spiritual activity. And that becomes the question mark of like that. Is that what I should do? How do I approach this? What else is there to following Jesus? And here's kind of how I think, this is kind of how it showed up to me as I started to think about it. It feels a little bit like this picture, right? Like there's me, and then there's like all of these different areas of my life. I've got like work, we got school, if you're in the middle, right, high school or college or whatever your training thing is. Then there's like some version of home life that we have, right? If you're living at home with your parents or you're married or you're doing whatever, you got roommates. And then like there's some kind of hobby probably that we have, right? Maybe you like to bowl or go roller skating, or does anybody roller skate? Is that even a thing anymore? Okay, good. I'm glad that somebody said yes, right? And, I play ultimate frisbee. Does anybody play ultimate frisbee? You're my favorite people. The rest of you I don't like, right? So you have like whatever you do, right? Your kind of hobby thing, and then here there would be like, then there's like the church stuff, right? And this is the part that took me a while to unpack. It feels like, or can feel like, this is the spiritual part, right? This is the spiritual part, and this stuff is not really spiritual. I mean, if I go have a job and I make widgets, like widgets aren't eternal. They're not going to last forever. You're right. They're all going to burn. It's going to go away, right? My work doesn't matter. My boss is a jerk, whatever. And right, school, does it really even matter what I'm learning right now? Is this relevant to life, right? And then home life, you're like, yeah, we kind of do home. That's where I crash from doing all the other things. And then like this part's fun, right? And so there's some version of that, and that like church is the spiritual part and Jesus lives there. And there's like this hard separation between Jesus stuff, church stuff, and all the rest of life. And what I'm pretty passionate about is breaking this picture down. And the reason why it's so important that we break this picture is because this is not what Jesus envisioned really at all. Let me show you what I mean. We're going to dive into it a bit. And this has become one of my favorite passages because I think it so revolutionizes every part of my life if I hear it properly. Right? So let me begin to dive into it. We're going to be in John chapter 15. And if you have a Bible and you want to follow along with us, you can do that. If you want one and you want to open it up and see, you can grab one from underneath the chairs there. If you use YouVersion, that's great. Open your phone or your tablet or whatever, and you can go there. I'm just going to read through a whole section of it, and we're kind of going to go through it pretty quickly, and then we'll explain the heart of what Jesus is trying to do here in John 15. Here's what Jesus says. He says, I'm the true vine, and my Father is the gardener. He says he cuts off every branch in me that bears no fruit, while every branch that does bear fruit he prunes, so that it'll be even more fruitful. He says, you are already clean because of the word I have spoken to you. He says, remain in me as I also remain in you. No branch can bear fruit by itself. It must remain in the vine. Neither can you bear fruit unless you remain in me. I'm the vine, you're the branches. If you remain in me and I in you, you will bear much fruit. Apart from me, you can do nothing. If you do not remain in me, you're like a branch that is thrown away and withers. Such branches are picked up, thrown into the fire, and burned. If you remain in me and my words remain in you, ask whatever you wish, and it will be done for you. He says, this is to my Father's glory, that you bear much fruit, showing yourselves to be my disciples. So here's what Jesus is going to do. We'll start with the end. He's in essence saying to his disciples, what I really want, what my Father wants, is for you guys that follow me to bear fruit. The way that fruit is born, right, comes to fruition, is by you staying connected to me, Jesus is going to say. Just like a branch stays connected to a vine, or we would probably think of more like a tree, right, in our picture. There's no way that fruit's going to come out the other end of that branch unless it's connected to the tree, unless it's connected to the vine, where all the nutrients and it all can all go through. And Jesus, in essence, is saying this. This is the way this thing happens, is you staying connected to me is the way that transformation is going to happen in your life. It's the way that impact is going to happen through your life. This is the thing that you want to lock onto. And here, let me just say this before we dive any deeper. The thing that God has been doing since the beginning of creation, since he made human beings, is he has been over and over and over trying to form a relationship with you and I. He literally just wants to be with his people. And it's not because he's needy. He doesn't need us. He's not like lonely or bored. He is doing it because he wants to love us. He's chosen to love you and I and to include us in his plan and in his work. And he's like, I know everything about you, and I'm still showing up again and again and again and again to have a relationship with you. I want to be with you in your life. What Jesus is saying, right, as we fast forward all the way through the Bible, we get to this point where the only way that was really, really, really going to be possible is if the Son of God actually put skin on, shows up on earth, lives a perfect life, dies an innocent death, rises from the dead, and makes you and I into something different, moving us from darkness to light, from dead to alive, right? And now you and I can have a connection to Jesus, and that connection can happen all the time. Not just in the spiritual church bubble. This is why this picture is not right. What Jesus is saying is he's saying, I don't want I don't want to live over here with you an hour or 5 hours or 7 hours a week while you do the things that you think of as spiritual. I'm not just looking to interact with you when you go to church or when you read your Bible or when you have dedicated times of prayer or you look and say, I'm going to be a part of a community and hang out with God's people, right? Or I'm going to serve and right, I'm going to pick up and try to be a part of God's mission and service. These things are awesome and important and valuable, and they help me realize that Jesus is with me. The Bible helps me understand who Jesus is, what God's heart is like, right? What his intention, what his will is. Prayer helps me realize that he sees and knows everything about me, and that I can offer him my burdens. I can bring anything that I'm wrestling with directly to Jesus. Dedicated times of prayer help me to do that. Right? When I give myself away in service, it helps me to remember my life's not about me, it's about him. When I gather with God's people on a weekend like this, we gather together and we draw energy from each other, and we look at each other and we remember as we feel accepted by each other, and we hear God's word taught and we worship together that there is, well, I'm not alone in this. Jesus is going to build his church, and he is doing that all over the place. And it's not just me, it's all these people are doing this with me. When I live life in community, when I live life with a few other people, a smaller group, this helps me to stay connected and fight kind of the battles of life with people. I'm part of one of these, man. I can't wait to get together with a group of guys that I gather with every few weeks. And we share life together, which early in the morning, it's going to crack a dawn. I kind of dread getting up that early. And then when I get up, I'm so glad that I went, because I'm strengthened. And I look at a bunch of people that are trying to do the same thing I am, and they pray for me, and I pray for them, and we need each other. Right? There's so much value in all this. Stay with me. Here's the point of all this stuff. This stuff isn't like the totality of what the spiritual life is. These things, what they help me to do, is they help me to show up in the spaces of my life, and they help me to not just show up and bring me into those spaces, they help me bring Jesus into those spaces. That when I go to school or I go home at night or I go to do the hobby or whatever, that I'm going to show up and I want Christ to show up in that space. And Jesus would look and say, I want to live life with you all the time. Would my work be different if I recognize that Jesus is there in the room? That he sees the way my boss treats me or what that coworker said about me. He sees the menial task that I don't want to do, but I do, and I do it faithfully because Jesus is there. Right? And sometimes the view and the vision of work, it sounds like this. It sounds like the work, what I'm doing, because it's not eternal, because it won't last forever, because the widgets are going to get thrown away and everything's going to burn, that this effort is not really that valid or important. And man, if I did something different, maybe if I did something spiritual, like worked at a church, then I would be doing something with my life. If I wasn't surrounded by all these jerks, then it would be amazing. My life would be awesome, and then I would be making a real impact and a real difference. And I would look at you and say, man, you want to work at a church and you want to not be surrounded by jerks. Have you ever worked with me? Right? Like, the reality is, you being where you are, you being planted where you are for this time, maybe it doesn't last forever, maybe there's a different role for you to play in the future, but ready or not, right here, right now, what God would look at you and say is, hey, what I'm trying to do here is I'm trying to show up in that space with you. When you go to school and you got to do that class or the assignment that feels like it has zero relevance to life, that never happens. Right? You walk in and you say, man, I don't know if I'm ever going to use this, right? Because we all use sigma and geometry on a regular basis, right? These things they don't show up in normal life, and you would say, hey, I'm gonna approach this. I'm gonna work with my teacher, and I'm gonna work with the students that are around me. I'm gonna recognize that there are people that show up in this space, and I'm gonna see them differently, and I'm gonna interact with them differently because Jesus is there. It's gonna change the way that I approach school. I'm gonna prepare for the day differently because this is here. Right? There's a bunch of you that are doing all kinds of stuff at home. Maybe a big portion of your life is here. Maybe this is where you crash at night after you work really hard. But the way you interact with the people that live in this building we call home is going to show up differently if Jesus is showing up with you. The way that you interact with your mom or dad, or your kids or your spouse, or maybe you're taking care of an aging parent, and you're doing the work of home differently because Jesus is in that space with you. Even the way we would show up in a hobby, right? Sometimes it's been presented this way, right, in church. Give up all your hobbies and just do church stuff all the time. Well, what if Jesus wants you to have good priorities, of course, right, and answer that question? It's a whole different conversation. But what if he doesn't want you to give up all your hobbies? What if he wants you to invite him into the hobbies that you have? What if he wants to show up with you and interact with the people that happen to be here too, and to see them differently, see them with eternal eyes in the spaces that you already are? You might have to determine, like we talked about last week, that some spaces have to go away. Man, you've been hanging out at the bar all the time and you're like, I need to stop drinking so much. You might have to close that space down. It's a real thing, right? You might have pieces of your life that you need to minimize, maybe a little less of this or more of that or whatever it looks like. But do I have to stop playing Ultimate Frisbee because I love Jesus? I don't know. I certainly hope not, right? But for a minute there, I thought I did. It wasn't spiritual enough. Guys, what's spiritual is Christ with us. Wherever you go, if you're a follower of Jesus, he's going with you. He's going with me. The challenge for me is to remember that and be aware of that and to want him to show up in all the spaces that I'm in. It starts to look very, very different if I'm going to bring Jesus into this space with me. These things turn into ways that help me remember who Jesus is and what he's about and what it means to be with his people. This is where that faith is exercised. This is like, right, think sports. This is practice. This is halftime. This is the game. It feels sometimes like following Jesus that this is the game. This is just the place where we gather together to get strength and clarity, information, and right, inspiration. This is where we meet with Jesus. This is where it's actually lived out. My passion is that we wouldn't just have interactions with Jesus 3 to 4 to 5 to 6 hours a week, that we would have interaction with Jesus 168 hours a week. That he would show up in all of our space. That's the heart. You say, Ryan, does Jesus really want to show up in all of the spaces of my life? Yes. That's the misunderstanding. But some of these spaces are really dark and ugly. I know. Invite him in. He'll make them different. Well, won't he judge me and send me to hell if he shows up in that space? No. That's the point of the whole thing. That's why he came. Not to condemn, but to save. Right? To make you and I go from darkness to light. Here's the idea. Right? And I want us to see that the impact and the purpose that we can have right where we are. You're a stay-at-home mom, or you're working a job that maybe you love, maybe you don't love. Maybe you rarely leave the home because you're taking care of you're changing diapers and taking care of people. Maybe you're in the midst of school and you're like, this is the worst thing I've ever done, right? Anything you're in the midst of right now starts to grab hold of and have purpose show up, because Jesus will show up and redeem the work that you're doing. Look what Paul says. I love this passage. This is so life-giving when I begin to find this. He says, whatever you do, whether in word or deed, do it all in the name of the Lord Jesus, giving thanks to God the Father through him. Whatever you do. You mean just church stuff? No, whatever you do, right? All of it. He is looking to show up in all of the spaces and all of the ways. Guys, let me give you an example. How many of you guys have heard about what God is doing through the Ohio State Buckeyes and the football players, right? And they're sharing their testimony. They're pointing to Jesus. How many of you guys are excited about that? Yeah, that's awesome, right? I love that. Here's what's fascinating to me. Those guys, I don't know any of them, so, right, I'm just kind of guessing a little bit. But, right, if you just logically make it play out, they're taking their space, right, somewhere between work and school for them. And they're taking this and they're making this a platform to point to the person of Christ. Let me spell it out, though, for you, right, just to get clear. In order for that platform to work, to be effective, they have to go back and the way they train and the way they eat and the way they go to sleep all goes into, right, and the way they bench press, right, it all goes into making it possible for them to have a platform to point to the person of Jesus. If their goal is to point to the person of Jesus, then what happens then is when they are making decisions about when should I go to bed, should I eat this or that, should I do my training workout or not, all of that becomes an act of worship that Jesus is a part of, because they're approaching it through this lens. There's not a church they're starting. They're not on a staff. They're not missionaries. They're football players, right? This is why this is such a big deal, because you and I don't take our lives that serious. How much do you prepare for your day and think about, I need to get enough sleep because tomorrow I show up in eternal space where I bring Jesus to bear. Tomorrow I bring Jesus to bear at school. I'm bringing Jesus to bear in the way I raise my. You think it's not very spiritual to raise infants? You're raising the next generation of eternal human beings. They're going to have an impact. Who knows how far that impact will go? You think it's not a big deal to show up? I work at a gas station. I don't know. Am I making that big of a deal? You interact with maybe hundreds of people a day. You think there's not a difference to how you show up in that space if you bring Jesus into it? You know, I'm just a teacher. I teach 15, 20 kids, 30 kids a day. I don't. You think it's not? You think there's not an opportunity there to make an unbelievable impact in the lives of people? Say, Ryan, I'm not on TV. There's nobody's putting a microphone in my hand. If hundreds of people show up different in their home, in their hobby, in their work, in their school, do you think it's going to start to get clearer who the person of Jesus is? You think you don't realize people are paying attention. Why would you look at the faithful care that you've had in taking care of your aging parent? You think that's not spiritual? Honor your father. That's incredible. It's incredible. See, he's saying, I'm not limited to this little slice. You love art? You love science? You love football? You love bowling? You love robotics? I don't care what you love. I don't care. The view that this doesn't matter, it's not eternal, it's all going to burn, it's not worth very much, it's not very valuable, is nonsense. Paul was a tent maker. Peter was a fisherman. These guys did normal stuff that you and I do. And they brought Jesus to it. Don't feel limited in your purpose because you're not on a staff or you're not a missionary or you don't have a microphone on your hand pointing to Jesus for OSU. Look at what God has given you and realize what he's trying to do, ready or not, is he's saying, I want to use your life in powerful and eternal ways. And it doesn't really matter what space it is. And it doesn't really matter as nearly as much as you think, what work or what school. You're all stressed out about what work or what school should I have or what home should I live in or what hobbies. He's like, I'll use it all. I'll use it all. Far more attention should be given to bringing Jesus into the space that I'm in, and a little bit should be focused on figuring out what kind of work should I do. You do this, and God will move you. He will align the steps for your feet. He will lead your path. He's saying, I came to give you life and have it abundantly. You mean so you mean during Bible study in church? Yes, definitely there, but also all these other hours of the day. Guys, this is great news. This is great news. Here's the reality, is God wants to do far more with our lives than we realize. He wants to do far more with our lives than we're ready for. I would love the opportunity to talk to those football players and ask them, did you ever imagine God using you like this? Or were you just maybe had a dream in your heart one day, or maybe you were just playing and then you saw the opportunity that God had for you. It does not have to be sexy, and it doesn't have to be flashy, and it doesn't have to be instant. It can be boring. It can be mundane. What matters is looking as an individual and saying, I'm going to make a decision, and that decision is going to sound like this. I'm going to realize that the days that I have are a renewed lease on life. Jesus literally bought me back from the dead. If you're a follower of Jesus today, that's the case. You and I have been bought back from the dead. What I deserve is separation from God in hell. No connection to Jesus whatsoever. And he would look and say, not only am I not going to give you that, I'm going to give you life and joy and purpose and peace that is beyond what you can even imagine. You're going to suffer with me because you're going to become like me, but don't worry, I'm going to be with you in the middle of it. And don't worry, there's going to be a bunch of people just that are a lot like you that are trying to do the same thing. And you are going to find that there is impact and revolutionary joy that's available in this mission and in this way of living. Guys, I just want you to know, if you're investigating Jesus today, we're not just offering you stop sinning and go to church. That's not what Jesus came for. Does he want sin to go out of your life? Totally. Absolutely. He saved you from it, so he paid for it. He just offers far more than that. A life that is marked by Jesus himself in any and every space you can possibly find yourself. And guys, I would look at you and say, I am far. There are spaces in my life where this is like not. It's only like kind of activated, barely activated. Don't look at this picture and assume that anybody is living this in any kind of way that sounds like perfect. It's just that more is better. It's that the more if I can show up at work and bring more Jesus into that space or at school, and it doesn't mean I have to scream with a megaphone. It involves the way I work or the way I study, the way I think about my decisions to enter into that space for that time of day, the way I come home, the way I'm a neighbor, the way if Jesus can show up and be stronger and more and more in that space, there will be more impact and there'll be more joy, there'll be more fruit. And so Jesus said, he just straight up promised it. Right? Apart from me, you can't do anything. But if you remain in me, if you abide in me, if you live with me, you will bear fruit. You will. Fruit will come from your life. Gentleness and faithfulness and self-control. Impact. People will view you in an unexplainable way, even though you feel deeply imperfect. They'll look at you and they'll see Jesus. And because of that, some will be drawn to faith in Christ. Some lives will change because you showed up in the daily grind when very few other people did that. Why do you do it that way? Why don't you talk about why does your home feel like a place where people are welcome? Why does it feel safe and good here? Why don't you worship your hobby, but you use it as a place to point to? I love this verse. This has become kind of a hallmark of Grace Church across many of, if not all of our campuses. John the Baptist, as he was pointing to the person of Jesus, his ministry was becoming less and Jesus was becoming more. And here's what he said. He said, he must become greater and I must become less. This is the heart. I must become less. What does that mean? I don't have the freedom. I don't have the freedom to just blow off my job. Blow. It's no big deal. Who am I? I'm bought with a price. Jesus has to show up here. He's got to become greater here. And when that becomes the heart's desire, the way we go to bed and the way we wake up and the way we think about all of these spaces starts to change. You say, Ryan, what do you do with all this, man? Like, it feels like my whole life just got messed up. You'll be okay. Here's what I would say. Let me give you a little picture and we'll make it make sense. I was pretty frustrated. I've got this room in my house, or I've got a little like at-home office desk area, right? It's like a portion of a room. And it like is a landing spot for dishes and laundry and random clutter, right? Papers, headphones, devices of all kinds, right? You name it. Like stuff. It's like a stuff magnet. And it drove me crazy. And clutter would be in other places too. And I was like, this is driving me insane, right? Like, I hate it. It makes me feel stressed out and bugs me. So I made this decision. I'm like, I can't fix all of the clutter in all of the spaces, at all times, in all ways. What I'm going to do is I'm going to pick one space for there to be no clutter. Nothing is going to live on this desk except what I want it to. That's it. I literally will take, like, if somebody puts a bowl there, I just take it over here and put it on the ground. Right? Nope. Not on my desk. Boom. Right? The desk is always clear. There may be clutter the desk is clear. And here's what I found happen is I've been doing it, is because I just keep that one little space the way that it needs to be, that mentality starts to bleed over into other spaces. I'm like, oh, man, I'm going to pick that up too. Yeah, what about, I'm putting this in the right spot. And it's starting to show up and help me keep the other places the way they need to be. Here's how I think about maybe where we should land with the conversation. I don't think it's possible or helpful, right, really beneficial in any way for you to say, I'm going to go do all of this all at once. That probably isn't going to work. Here's what we could do. We could say, Lord, help me pick one. I'm just going to pick one of these spaces. I just want to pick one of these spaces. And maybe it's a space that is connected to last week where there's something that needed to be cut off. And you say, I want to have Jesus show up in a big way and fill this space. Maybe it's home, or maybe it's school or work or whatever. Maybe it's not even on this board. And you say, I'm just going to start with this one. I'm going to start here. And I'm going to approach this aspect of my life. And Jesus, I want you to show up in there with me more and more and more. And when you prepare to go into that space, whether it's 3 minutes or 30 minutes, a little bit of preparation with some of this, prayer or Bible, or maybe there's a community that helps fire the energy to go there. You say, I'm gonna need some help. And guys, when we start to pick one of these and live this out, we start to see our need for these things differently. Maybe you pick one space and dive in there, and maybe you pick one of these pieces to bring more support. Let me say this. I know there's some of us here that you started going to church. It's been like 3 or 4 weeks. And it's been a long time, or maybe it's been never. Maybe you're like me, didn't grow up in church. Listen, if you just start going to church and you're like, this is my 3rd or 4th time, guys, that's huge. That's a big deal. Like, just keep doing that. Right? You can go to Discovery. It's today, by the way. Right? You can do that too. Right? But like, seriously, just keep going to church. Just get that habit built. Some of us have kind of have that one built in. And you might look and say, it's time for me to stretch. I'm going to need, if I'm going to do something different, I'm going to need something different. I might need some community and some accountability and some help to show up here consistently. I'm going to check this out. I might take a step and begin to check out one of our 20-some communities that we have here. Or maybe I'm going to pick up some Bible and pick one here, and just start. Can't solve it all in a day, but I can start somewhere. Start with one. And watch what God does, and watch how a relationship with Jesus bleeds into the other areas. The big deal is we don't want just to stay here in spiritual land. Right? This is for all of this. Right? This is the help and the gifts that God has given to do the mission and to live the life with him that he's called us to. Guys, I'm going to have the band come up, and we're going to sing and worship. Would you nail that down today before you leave? Where do I want to see Jesus show up? And what pieces of support am I going to grab hold of? Would you bow your heads, close your eyes with me as we pray? We'll sing and worship together. Lord, we are so grateful today that what you're doing and what you're offering is not limited to a building we call church, or an activity that we organize through the church. What you're trying to do is in all of life. You want to show up in all of our days. And you long to be with us in it. And you'll forgive us when we mess it up. And you'll help us in our weakness. And even when we don't feel adequate or ready, you would look and say, I'm your father. You're my child. I want to be with you. Lord, you help us to let you in to the spaces of our lives that maybe you've been absent from. And would you just inject energy, and purpose, and courage, and vibrancy. Lord, thank you. Lead us, Lord. Meet us in our days. Would you start with that even now?